Are you happy now?
Well, I'm not unhappy.
Glad to hear it. Christ. Going into this game, I didn't have the highest of expectations. However, I could say the same about the first Ultima, and that game really surprised me. Let's say I was intrigued to see the sequel, especially since this time we are playing it properly. However, this game is... Sorry, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. Remember how the original started? You are in an open field, feeling like the entire world is open to you. Yet there is a castle nearby, a place where you can get your bearings on how to heal, get food, and even get a quest right off the bat. This is Ultima 2. Notice how there is no town in the frame. Yet there is a linear sort of corridor. If you go down, you'll find a tower surrounded by swamps. You take damage by walking on swamps, and when you enter the tower, you realize that you can't see. So if you decide to walk a couple steps in the dark, you might as well just start over, which I do. At this moment, you can already tell like something's off, but anyway. After restarting the game, you go the only other way, hoping to find some sort of a town, only to run into the first enemy, deliberately placed at this junction. However, something goes wrong. Horribly wrong. You see, to remedy the mindless battle system of the original, Ultima 2 decided to up the ante, as they say, and make it so that you are basically worthless in the combat until you level up your agility to the max. Agility here determines not just the effectiveness of your dodges, but also the accuracy of your attacks. I don't really think I can adequately convey how what you're looking at feels to play. But trust me, there's nothing more agitating than missing most of your attacks for no apparent reason. Yet this is the reality now. Oh, and don't worry, this is just the beginning. This mechanic's going to bite you so hard in the rear later, you'll be wishing to fight the orc again. After this prolonged exercise in frustration, you can proceed further down the... Where is the goddamn town? I mean, seriously, I see a castle was there, right? But there is none on the land. There is this weird calm-looking enemy appearing out of nowhere, so I might as well attack him. Wait, what? Now I'm confused.
Maybe you should have read the manual.
The first game didn't require it, so I thought I could just skip it here, but oh well.
That first enemy, by the way, always appears in that corridor, as you put it. That's how Gary had intended to teach the player about combat on the easiest enemy in the game.
Well, it's not like a genius design decision, you know.
But it's a good one. You got to give credit when credit is due.
Yeah, I guess. Turns out that one of the major gimmicks of Ultima 2 is the ability to travel to 5 distinct time periods. And yes, this game actually takes place on Earth. Time travel here is realized through those calm-looking portals spread across the map which appear at certain timed intervals. Thank God their placement and the destinations to which they teleport you is not randomized. So once you memorize their network, you might have an easier time orienting yourself in this mess. But at the start, Jesus, it made my head hurt. The map in the manual wasn't all that helpful either. In fact, it's completely useless. It just feels like I'm having some sort of a fever dream. Then I noticed that I don't have any HP left, nor any way of healing myself. Jesus, I must be doing something wrong. Let's restart the game. This time, let's go straight for the portal. Oh no, not that one. This portal, obviously. And yep, this is the only way of getting to Lord British's castle now. A bit more roundabout than it was in the first game, wouldn't you say? And this time, offering pence to the king is the only means of restoring HP. Yes, no dungeon grind for health in this one. An unfortunate implication of that gameplay change is that, well, there is no point in dungeons anymore. Or maybe there is, I don't know. But at least at this early point in the game, there is no purpose to them at all. There is also a town nearby, and yeah, this is a significant improvement over the original. Technically. I mean, what you're looking at right now is going to be symptomatic of the entirety of Ultima 2. It's bigger, it has more content, more mechanics, it has a more elaborate and technologically sophisticated design, yet all it does is add unnecessary aggravation and tedium to the experience, which ruins the alluring simplicity of the original. The manual hints that you should be talking to every NPC you encounter, for some can give you helpful hints, or rather information without which you can't beat the game. Yet even the manual itself addresses that most are just saying the same stock phrases over and over again, so yeah, it may be a step forward for the genre, but it's not fun. It's just another problem that the original game didn't have. As you can probably tell, I'm not that big a fan of this game. However, I still haven't fully elaborated on what the early game here is really like. I mean, you've restarted this game like 3 times already, but trust me, this is nothing in comparison to what we have going for the next 4 to 5 hours of playtime, if I'm not mistaken. So get this, no matter what character you create at the start, you're going to be horrifically ineffective in combat. What you need is to buy equipment, get a workable amount of health, food, and level up your stats, which, by the way, you have not even the slightest clue of how to do at this point. And oh man, just you wait until you hear how the RPG system works here. But it will require money. Yeah, that's what it all boils down to. You need money. And the way you get them is by killing enemies, which, as we've discussed, isn't as easy a proposition as it was back in the day. Meaning that you lose a lot of HP just trying to get money to get HP. But more than that, you waste food, so on top of paying for HP and the mandatory purchases of weapons and armor without which you are just as good as dead, you're basically just stuck in a loop. This entire ordeal has been nicknamed Begin as Hell, by the way, and whether or not you get out of this hell is, well, up to a random chance. You might get unlucky and just get sandwiched between 2 enemies, for example, which will give you so much damage, you literally won't have any other option but to restart the game again. But this isn't even the worst possibility. There is a weird mechanic here. Enemies don't ever disappear, and there is a limit to the amount of enemies that can be alive at the same time. So until you've killed a currently spawned enemy, another one won't appear in his place. And this is a problem since some enemies are much harder than others. For instance, there is this wizard who kept disabling my ability to attack, and while I was paralyzed, kept hitting me and not missing. Yet, even when the spell would wear off, I couldn't hit him for the life of me. And when I did manage to hit him, he ran away. Jesus, I forgot to mention that enemies run away when they have low health now, so you have to chase them down with those 10% accuracy attacks. Imagine how much fun I was having when all the non-disappearing enemies spawned right next to this wizard. You know, it would be all tolerable, really, if not for the fact that health is a much more valuable resource here than it was in the first game, so this wizard guy can, and in my case he did, beat me so bad I had to play the game again and again, since I literally had no way of buying food or health. This is what I was doing for 2 straight hours of playtime. So at this point I just gave up and simply looked up a walkthrough and what I've discovered there should be more or less revealing as to how broken this early game really is. Fellas, there is a correct build in this game. If you wanna get anywhere in Ultima 2, you have to make a character with high charisma and intelligence, so that the prices which are affected by those 2 stats will be lowered, thus making the resource management manageable. So yeah, human female wizard is the way to go, and every other way is not just wrong, masochistic. I would even go as far as to say it's impossible, since with those prices for food and equipment, you will be stuck in the beginner's hell for pretty much eternity. So okay, now that we've made a correct character, have some idea where everything is, and of the fact that the prehistoric Pangaea is the only viable place to kill enemies, since it's more or less one giant island, enemies won't be appearing beyond your reach. Mostly. Oh, and this time it's this portal. Don't confuse it with the one leading to Lord British. Now we, well, start grinding. And yes, slowly but surely we get HP, food and items. If you thought that to explore dungeons you would have to buy torches, you are wrong. The only way to acquire torches is by killing thieves. Only thieves. Not warriors, not wizards, not even orcs that live in those freaking dungeons. Only thieves drop all the in-game items. Not that we want to enter dungeons anyway, since you'll run out of money faster than you will find your first treasure chest in there. What we need to get from thieves is a different item, blue tassel. I mean, remember how we had to buy transport at the transport store in the first game? Logical, wasn't it?
Not really.
Gameplay-wise logical, right? In this game, the only transport you can buy is a useless horse. Useless because it won't go over swamps, which is sort of annoying. I was suckered into buying a horse, which meant that the money I needed for food was now refusing to obey my commands. Restarting the game it is. But back to blue tassels, you need them to board a frigate. Likewise, you need brass buttons to get on a plane and an Ankh for a rocket. We'll get there in time, don't worry. For now we just have to get a ship. The way we do that is the least self-evident way I can possibly think of. We have to grind our asses until we see a pirate ship coming to the shore. Note that it fires at you, taking away those precious health points. So yeah, keeping that in mind, you need to run up to it, walk into it, and then board it. Wait, we can't. The thief stole our goddamn blue tassel. That's annoying, isn't it? So wait, the only way to get this crucial item is from those hard to kill enemies that have 1 in 20 chance of dropping this item, and which then might steal it back from you. Like during the time when you're going to just have to wait for those freaking pirates to show up. What the actual
George!
Come on, Seal, do you see what I have to go through here? But okay, after enacting the most specific and unintuitive sequence of events, we finally get ourselves a frigate. At this point, the game is pretty much over. You won. Congratulations. Remember how the original had this complex, multi-layered progression system in which there was numerous aspects you only gradually come to understand and master over the entire course of the game. Dungeons, signposts, quests, equipment. In Ultima 2 it's just the boat and that's it. There is the early game with you being stuck in the beginner hell, and then, after you get the boat, you're basically just cruising through the game with all the money in the world, trying not to get bored with the goddamn thing. If you're wondering what's so special about the frigate, look at that. This is the very first minute after I got a frigate, and I made more money from it than after an hour of playtime before. It's because the boats don't miss in this game. More than that, you don't waste food in there. And you can get to the remotest places of the map, so no enemy will be left unkilled, so no wasted grind. I've got to admit that when I first discovered how overpowered the boat is, I felt extreme sense of satisfaction. It's as close as this game ever got to replicating the feeling I got from Ultima 1, except after a couple dozen minutes of blasting my vengeance upon those goddamn wizards, I realized that this is how it's going to go now. I will be doing loops around Pangaea for quite a while. All in all, while playing through Ultima 2, I've spent more than 7 hours doing this. I'm not exaggerating, just this. Remember how difficult it was to get out of the beginner's hell in the first game? You had to enter a dungeon, leave it, notice that you get HP from it, and that's it. Do I even need to go further to make a case for this being a bad game? What sort of reward should this game have in its second half to justify all this? Like, I'm no stranger to the concept of earning your victory in a game, right? But what reward would even be worth going through all this trouble?
What do you mean by that? Didn't you cover games like Prince of Persia and Wizard 7 already?
Yeah, but those were... Okay, I see your point. Let's keep going with this. The RPG system of Ultima 2 works as follows. You grind a bunch of money, go to 1990 AD, find the city of New Antonio, visit Hotel California, of all places, and then offer all the gold you've got. Need I remind you, you got this gold from blasting shores with cannon fire in prehistoric times. So give all that cash to a random hotel clerk. He then may or may not give you a stat boost to a random stat. Of course, we are talking about RPG from 1982 after all. So yeah, this is not great, especially since if you level up a stat over the 99 mark, the game resets the stat to 0. Because again, 1982. Back then computers were bad at, counting. The possibility of losing your stat parameters in conjunction with the uncertainty of which stat gets leveled up gives this game an unintentional dynamic. You obviously don't want to get over the 99 mark, so you become extra careful when you get close. More specifically, once any of your stats get to the 94 to 99 points, you're likely going to stop leveling up altogether. This leaves you with a unique build. Naturally, every stat other than the one that inclined you to stop leveling up is going to be weaker than the most powerful one. How so is a matter of random luck. Personally, I happen to have a character with high wisdom and low stamina, which is completely beyond my intention. It's just the way the dice rolled. Let me point out that this is not an inherently bad gimmick. In modern roguelike games akin to FTL or Binding of Isaac, randomness in character builds can lead to amazing results, but it has to be utilized correctly. Ultima 2 does not utilize it correctly. Firstly, no matter what build you make, you will play the game in the exact same manner. You have to attack enemies with a weapon. You have to take damage. You have to buy things. Even if you play as a mage, relying exclusively on magic is not a viable option, since spells would drain your wallet rather quickly. Even the manual says that a mage should also get a weapon. This means that randomly spreading points across the stats will not result in characters that approach situations differently, but in characters who are hindered at what they are supposed to be doing, just hindered in different ways. You might get ridiculously high prices, so you have to grind more. You might be taking more damage or dealing less than you are meant to in a fight, or the worst possible thing, you might be constantly missing because of low agility. So the problem with this RPG system, right, is that instead of offering replayability like you would expect, it just decreases the quality of the overall experience. It randomly decides what will annoy the player on the current playthrough, instead of choosing what will entertain him. Furthermore, the stats are inherently unequal. At the start, charisma and intelligence are essential, since you'll fail or succeed based on them alone. However, by the time you get to level up your stats, you're already settled. You already have the means of making money consistently, so prices are not important anymore. At this stage you need strength, stamina, and above all, agility, because they determine how capable you are in a fight. Intelligence and wisdom are very much non-important, since magic is sort of useless here, not gonna lie. So, on top of random stat placements being an inherently nonsensical mechanic for a game that doesn't have any replayability, we have a problem of randomness determining how capable your character will be overall. If you are unlucky and get all the points in wisdom, intelligence and charisma, you will inevitably have a much harder time than someone who got all the points in strength, agility and stamina. In other words, if you are unlucky, you'll probably have to start the game again. The final nail in the coffin of this RPG system is that, for technical reasons, if you get the sum of intelligence and charisma above 160, the prices of the game will skyrocket. So if you happen to not know about this and manage to get all the stats rather high, this is a very unpleasant sucker punch to the player. So yeah, in the original you'd be making rounds between signposts, leveling up the stats you chose to upgrade, making it a rather fair system in comparison. It's controlled at the very least. You chose the stat to upgrade, so you aren't afraid of randomness. Furthermore, signs always level up your stats. Clerk, on the other hand, half the time refuses to level you up for no reason. All in all, this is not nearly as satisfying a reward for grind as what we've had before. But let's talk about something a bit more positive, before I completely lose my mind. The dungeons in Ultima 2, unlike the previous title, aren't randomly generated. There are 7 dungeons in total, each having 15 unique levels that remain the same on every playthrough. This is not as clear-cut an improvement as this may sound, though. On their own, new dungeons are obviously better. One level will have a conventional dungeon crawling maze, the other will have a symmetrical layout or an invisible maze. Some even go as far as to spell out a certain phrase that only becomes apparent once you've mapped out the level, which is actually a very nice touch, I think. Overall, those dungeons are longer, bigger, with enemies that went full EGA, and there are even secrets to uncover. One of the rare moments when I didn't completely hate the new enemies running away gimmick was when an orc suddenly disappeared after running into a wall, which inclined me to try walking into it, revealing a secret passage. It's actually quite neat, and reminds us that, for all its shortcomings, this game is still being made by a talented game developer. But that's where the positives end. In the first Ultima, dungeons served an essential purpose. You couldn't complete the game without finding and killing monsters that only appear below ground. This meant that not only was there an incentive to keep on exploring, but since all the enemies will be converted in HP upon exiting, not a single second in a dungeon was a waste. There is none of that in Ultima 2. Those dungeons are completely pointless. Getting money is infinitely more effective with the boat, and getting XP is even less useful than it was in the first game, because this time around we don't have to find any special monsters to beat the game. I usually praise optional stuff in games, but here dungeons aren't exactly fun. The torches, for instance, not only run out on their own, but the second most common dungeon enemy has a tendency to blow out your torches. Also, the traps, even when you have the tools to avoid them, still extinguish your torches for some reason. Need I remind you that running out of torches in a labyrinth may very well lead you to having to restart the game again. To add to the tedium, there is also a real time mechanic. In the first game, the time stopped whenever you weren't moving, but here it automatically passes on its own. So if you're trying to map out the dungeon, which is how you play the game, mind you, you have to pause it every other step, which I did by using a yell command. So here I was, going through the Eat Me dungeon with a pen and paper, yelling nothing in particular as I was rapidly losing my only means of illumination.
George, there is actually an intended reward at the end of each dungeon.
Oh, we will talk about that, Seal, don't you worry. But first, we should address what replaced the monster killing quests from the first game as the core means of progression in this one. The towns and castles are very similar to dungeons, as in they are much bigger and more elaborate than they were in the original, with each having a unique layout. Like the Leicester town, for example. filled with pestering jesters, which is probably something Ezio Auditore has nightmares about. There is also a so-called pirate harbor in the post-apocalyptic future on the territory of what was once Soviet Union, and it's... Oh. I really like how there are tons of KGB agents everywhere, especially around the space shuttles that you need to steal in a rather direct manner. Wait, you get launched into space from Russia? Did Kyriot, predict his own life here? Anyway, you really shouldn't get too excited about getting to space, because what awaits us there is the final disappointment with this game. Conceptually, there are 5 time periods and an entire solar system you can explore with towns and dungeons of its own to boot. Sounds awesome! It's like Chrono Trigger and Phantasy Star rolled into one game. But yeah, this is where ambition bites Garriott in the rear, I feel. There is no difference, either visual or story-wise, in how people look or what they say between towns. It may be a colony on Mars, a prehistoric settlement, or a city from the 90s, it's all the same. I mean, calling it the same doesn't do it justice. I remember people complaining about Oblivion for having towns that look alike, but here it's literally true. Look, can you even tell which of the 3 you are looking at? Well, it's Mars. How about this one? It's a prehistoric settlement.
You're being unfair to an old game, George. They couldn't do anything better back then.
Oh, come on, Seal. In comparison to the original, this straight up sucks. And it actually came out before this one.
Like the towns in the first game were any better.
Indeed, they weren't, but they served a function. To use a clear-cut analogy, they were similar to towns from Mountain Blade, Sid Meier's Pirates, or Sea Dogs, which could be considered soulless games if not for how mechanically oriented they were. When you enter a town in Ultima, there is no pretense. It doesn't demand you to go on exploring or talking to people because it knows it doesn't have anything to show for it, so it lets you access any of the stores quickly. That is why it works so well with the limitations of the overall experience. The game is simplistic, minimalist. It creates a tight gameplay system in which everything serves a specific function with nothing unnecessary. Ultima 2, on the other hand. Do you want to know what reward awaits you for completing a dungeon? An entire floor of trilithium, which is used as space fuel and can be easily obtained from thieves that you have to kill regardless as part of grinding. I had so much on me that I couldn't get more than a dozen for the fear of getting over the 99 mark, which would reset it all to 0, of course. To complete the game, you only need to visit one planet X. Every other planet will have nothing but more of those pointless towns with no personality and dungeons, which will all have trilithium at their bottom. It's a goddamn loop of tedium again. Oh, and by the way, look at the landing. Yeah, you have to precisely land at the square without trees, rocks, or water, and if you fail, you'll die. So, really, was the beginner's hell worth it? Even remotely? Again, I'm all for optional stuff in games, but here, optional content has nothing to offer except a giant waste of time. It's like this game takes the original, right, and devoids it of all that made it interesting. To be fair, it did add a lot of new mechanics to the original game's formula, but every single one of them is implemented so poorly that together they ruin the experience completely. Let's ask this: what's the basic gameplay system of Ultima 2? Going through the beginner's hell through pure trial and error, getting the frigate, grinding money, buying stat upgrades and equipment, rinse and repeat until full, then get the space shuttle, go to planet X, talk to Father Abbott, go to San Antonio, buy a ring, go to the final castle, kill the witch, end the game. Notice what I've just described doesn't sound like much of a system, but more like a walkthrough. That's because there is no system, it's just the frigate, equipment stores, and the freaking Hotel California. Remember how the original had 2 distinct lines of grinding, the dungeons and signposts? This allowed the player to vary his experience, to switch from one to the other when it gets a bit dull. More than that, you could customize your grind. You could plan out the routes between signposts and castles to level up only what you want, in the way you want it. And with dungeons, you could pick one dungeon and grind there all the time, or you could travel around, switching dungeons on a whim. You could do massive hauls, spending a long time accumulating unchecked HP before cashing it all out by leaving the dungeon. Or you could do it little by little, keeping a close eye on the progress. There was so much freedom and control in the first game, but Ultima 2 is rigid. It's the frigate or bust. The decision to tie the leveling up system to money, the merging of two distinct grinds into one, was a complete and utter mistake, I feel. So yeah, Ultima 2. Go through the beginner hell, grind for 7 hours, beat the final boss. Why are we even talking about this game?
I have no idea. You just out of nowhere decided to play it.
I don't mean like that. I mean, why would anyone be drawn to it in the first place?
Because it's Ultima.
Exactly. I mean, this is a notable work of art. Ultima is a venerable and influential series of games, so Ultima 2, by being a part of it, remains in the video game discourse. Let me ask, what is this work exactly? Thematically, I mean. It's fantasy, science fiction, time travel, post-apocalypse, horror, space opera, comedy, and even contemporary fiction. Furthermore, it's both in first and third person perspectives. It's an RPG, adventure, and management game. It sounds like it's the greatest thing of all time. Yet what we get is a lackluster and surprisingly forgettable game. All those genres and styles that we care so much about as patrons of the arts. And let's face it, if you are watching this video about a 40-year-old game, you do care about video games as an art form. All those exciting things are laid bare before our eyes as basically variations on the same exact thing. A fantasy dungeon looks exactly like an unexplored alien cavern on Mercury. The medieval town or castle with people speaking Old English dialect are exactly the same as contemporary cities with hotels and airports, and even the post-apocalyptic settlement built in the middle of a wasteland on the territory of what was once USSR. All those and more tropes and romantic notions are being stripped off of their romanticism. We now see them as what they are, a fake, make-believe pretense, a variation on the same exact notion, and this notion is fiction. There is no fundamental difference between contemporary fiction and space opera and horror, even though to us it feels like they are different. What I mean is, by spending more time than necessary with Ultima 2, you risk getting disillusioned about art in general. You risk understanding that Fallout 2, Stranger in a Strange Land, Lord of the Rings, Space Odyssey, all those things have the same boring variations on the concept of narrative. All of them are meaningless exercises in self-pretense, with the grand realization being that there is far more suspension going on in the phrase suspension of disbelief than we would like to admit. In short, Ultima 2 is something that can actively cause depression and ruin people's lives, which is why I would not recommend it. Ultima 2, The Revenge of the Enchantress, is a bad game.
It's not that bad, especially for the time.
True, but you know what's actually surprising is not that Ultima 2 was bad, but it's that the original turned out to be so enjoyable in spite of its age. It would be naive to expect two 40-year-old games in a row to be so exceptional.
Will you try out a third game?
I don't know. I feel a bit tired with these games.
Come on, George, that's the first proper Ultima. You can't play the second one and neglect the third.
I hear the fourth one is really good.
Don't mind that. You have to play the third one first.
We'll see. We'll see.